Professor Joseph Magnet, Canada Committee, he is a constitutional expert and a professor in Ottawa University Law Department. And he has been advocating for the Afars for a long time now and has made a tremendous achievement in terms of bringing the Afar issue on international community, and also he is preeminently well-known on indigenous rights, indigenous people rights. So he's going to share with us his knowledge, and we are happy here to have him as a guest. 2 years ago also he made a presentation via Skype. We welcome him here, and Professor Joseph Magnet, and we'll give you the stage for you to speak.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for those kind words. It's my honor and my pleasure to be here among my Afar friends. It's good. I first met with you in Samara, in Afar State in Ethiopia in 2010, and again in 2011. I traveled with you all around Afar State in Ethiopia. I met hundreds of Afar refugees from Eritrea, and I listened very carefully to the stories that they had to tell. Stories of land confiscations, stories of mistreatment, stories of persecution, stories of fear. And now we hear stories of drought and climate change. We talked then and throughout the years of what was needed in Eritrea, but now also in Ethiopia and Djibouti. Afar autonomy, self-government, human rights, indigenous rights, democracy, and the rule of law. I also met with the Afar leadership, with Afar elders, leaders of the Waredas, customary leaders, political leaders. And over days of discussions, we refined the Afar ideas. You asked me to capture these ideas in a document. And together, we set out the Afar will in a solemn declaration. In the Samara Declaration 2010-2011, the Afar condemned Eritrea for its violation of Afar rights. You expressed your will to join hands with other nationalities in a new liberal democratic regime in Eritrea based on the rule of law, on human rights. You demanded equality for all nationalities in a reformed Eritrea. You demanded indigenous rights for the Afar who had inhabited that territory for 2,000 years. You demanded self-government for the Afar in an autonomous Dankalia inside an Eritrean federation. You demanded control of Afar lands and resources, protection for the Afar language. And I explained to you at that time that these are the normal demands that national minorities and indigenous peoples make where they live as minority communities all around the world. And that in all of the countries of the world where the national minorities and indigenous peoples numbered communities the size of the Afar, these demands were granted. There were no exceptions. The issues that we're discussing in Eritrea also occur in Ethiopia and in Djibouti. And you might want to consider how the Afar vision that was declared in the Samara Declaration now applies to these two countries which have their own governance problems. The Samara Declaration was opened for signature. 5,000 Afar signed it within weeks, including the elders, the clan leaders, the Wareda leaders, the political leaders. No one expressed dissent. And since that time, in groups like this, and in Afar diaspora communities around the world, in Australia, in Canada, in Sweden, in Norway, here in Belgium, the Afar diaspora have approved these principles in this document. Some Tigrinian leaders expressed charitably dissent to these principles, particularly to the idea of a federation. The Tigrinian leaders preferred a centralized constitution, such as was created by the Eritrean Constitutional Commission 1995 to 1997. A highly centralized Stalinist vision where power comes to the center, control of resources is at the center, control of lands are at the center, and of course we see that those are used for a small clique in Eritrea. So we, on behalf of the Afar, engaged with the Tigrinian leadership to explain the Afar vision, to show why a power-sharing constitution was not only in the Afar interest, but was in the interest of the large nationalities, because the experience of the democracies was that power-sharing multinational constitutions produced peace and stability and development, and that power-dominating constitutions produced conflict, irredentism, and wasted time and resources in fighting with each other. And so that this was not just an Afar interest, but it was an interest of everybody to come together and to be fair and to share. We engaged to explain this vision. And we, in 2011, we got some, not a lot, of agreement from some Tigrinian leaders. In 2012, we convened a world conference in Ottawa. We invited the glitterati of constitutional law, human rights, to Ottawa. And we also invited the chair of the Eritrean Constitutional Commission that produced the centralized 1997 Constitution, Dr. Bereket Haile Selassie. He came, and he engaged in the presence of world experts with us. And we explained the Afar vision to him, and we explained why the centralized constitution that he had created was a problem and was not the best model for Eritrea. Over some days of discussion, Dr. Selassie said on video he had made a mistake, and if he had to do it over again, the way forward was down the path that the Afar had cut. Power sharing, autonomy, guaranteed control of lands and resources for the Afar community and other minority communities in their hands. The result of all these conferences, all this work, we had another one in 2014. We invited experts from Oxford University, the leading American universities. Again, we explained the Afar vision. We invited the leadership of the Tigray, to explain our vision. And again, we made progress in getting assent to this. Your Afar colleagues are particularly persuasive. Some in this room attended and engaged with Tigray leadership, and we found much assent, much goodwill behind the Afar vision, so that we can say that we have made considerable progress in advancing what is a unified Afar view with the other nationalities. We can also say that we have a lot more work to do. This is hard work. We need to be patient. It takes time. People do not change their minds easily. But the Afar have a view that is salable and that has been sold. Now, you also asked me to bring the Afar case in Eritrea to the attention of the international community. But in 2010, nobody had heard of the Afar. And what you were asking was to take action to protect the Afar from abuse inside of Eritrea. And on your behalf, I submitted several cases to the United Nations Human Rights Council and to other United Nations agencies, requesting the United Nations to take appropriate measures to address the ongoing and gross human rights violations inside of Eritrea, to take steps to protect fundamental human rights and freedoms. And the result of these cases is that the United Nations took notice of the problems of the Afar and appointed a special rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea, Sheila Kita-Ruth. I engaged with her to document the violation of human rights that was taking place. I showed her how Eritrea had taken over Afar businesses, fisheries, pastoral areas, lands, homes, and I proved to her through witnesses that Eritrea had cut down the trees on which the pastoralists depended, destroyed the plants, the herding areas, prevented the fishermen from selling their fish as they had been doing in Yemen, took homes from the Afar, colonized Denkalia. I conferenced with her 4 times, and I asked her to allow me to examine eyewitnesses to atrocities against the Afar in front of her, which she allowed me to do. And some brave Afar came forward and testified as to the murders that they had personally witnessed, with the security services coming into their villages and killing all the men, and how they ran away and hid until they left. How children were murdered. They testified as to rapes. They testified as to torture. And I invited the Special Rapporteur, Kita-Ruth, to examine these witnesses herself, and in effect to cross-examine them, which she did. And I then corroborated the testimony that she had heard with analysis of 21,000 intake interviews that the neighboring countries had done with the refugees from Eritrea, which basically told the same stories that she had heard from the live witnesses. This is a lot of evidence. And on the basis of that evidence, the Special Rapporteur verified the allegations that the Afar had made. And she said this in her report, paragraph 77, the Afar are subjected to killings, disappearances, torture, rape, the destruction of their traditional livelihood. They have also been forcibly displaced from their traditional territory. That's her finding. She reported that to the United Nations Human Rights Council. I asked the Human Rights Council to confirm her findings, and the Human Rights Council did so unanimously. All countries of the world have a seat on that council. And as a result of this, Eritrea is increasingly isolated, increasingly vulnerable. The Human Rights Council went further. It appointed a commission of inquiry on human rights in Eritrea, which issued 2 reports. The commission of inquiry came to us, the Afar team, and asked us to document human rights violations against the Afar. We accepted that invitation. We tendered additional witnesses, many witnesses to atrocities against the Afar inside of Eritrea, including, for example, an Afar Sultan, Sultan Shami, who testified, for example, that he personally had received complaints of mass murder and was taken by the complaining parties to a grave, a mass grave, where there were still bones and remains sticking out. What happened? And
no, I think
They should fire.
no. What is the? Sorry, we're missing this.
Is there a meter? Otherwise it's down here.
This one right here.
Okay, Lenny.
Slide it right there.
No,
What is it? I have one.
I mean, I can do this without the power.
Yeah.
Yep.
No. Sorry.
Clearly, we have a long way to go.
How PowerPoint, she asked me how PowerPoint works. Good question. And she was not my answer, she was not satisfied. I said it doesn't. The Commission of Inquiry came to us, and Commission asked us if we could prove our case of Afar atrocity for them. So we tendered witnesses before the Commission of Inquiry. As I said just before the tech break there, we had tendered Sultan Shami, who had witnessed mass graves. He was asked by the parties that were complaining of these to go speak with the Eritrean authorities. And so his testimony before the Commission of Inquiry was, thank you, that he accepted that responsibility to go dialogue with the Eritrean authorities. And so he went in Assad to say, you know, this is there, and you know, various things have to be done, including proper burial of the murdered victims. And he was brushed off by the colonel he spoke with, who said, yeah, you know, we know all about that. You know, we're responsible for that. We're not doing anything, and we don't really think that you should be coming here again. In other words, his testimony is, I saw the mass grave. I saw the murdered people's remains. I confronted the people responsible, and they admitted they did it. You know, I've been a prosecutor. This is dramatic evidence. This is dramatic evidence. So it is evidence like this that we proved before the Human Rights Council. I showed them where the mass grave was and asked them to do a flyover to verify it because the remains were still visible. And the Commission of Inquiry agreed with us. This is what they said in paragraph 295 of their report. It said that the Commission has reasonable grounds to believe that the Afar were persecuted. And it concluded that therefore the Eritrean officials have committed the crime of persecution, which is a crime against humanity, which is exactly what we had alleged and proved with evidence and legal argument. And the Commission made several recommendations, including that the Security Council and other UN agencies determine that the situation of human rights in Eritrea poses a threat to world peace and security, that the Security Council, which has the authority to do so, refer the Eritrean case to the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court for action against the criminals, and that the Security Council impose sanctions on the officials who are responsible, travel bans, asset freezes, and other measures. Now, I gave the Commission of Inquiry the names of responsible officials. And the Commission of Inquiry compiled files on them, and it asked all UN member states to exercise their jurisdiction against them, meaning that if the Security Council refers the Eritrean case to the International Criminal Court, these people will face arrest warrants and be subject to arrest whenever they travel outside of Eritrea. The victims of this persecution, some are in this room. The families who are persecuted are related to people in this room. They are related to the people who originally asked me to take action on the Afar behalf. And so as counsel to the victims, I will appear, if this case is referred to the International Criminal Court, I will appear as counsel for the victims there, and I will prosecute these people and bring them to justice. We're looking at a picture of Slobodan Milosevic, the former president of Yugoslavia, who he and his general, Radovan Karadzic, was a picture of his general, were lobbing shells against innocent civilians until stopped by a United States air campaign. And they subsequently were arrested, both of them, and sent for trial for crimes against humanity in The Hague before the International Criminal Court, just as now the path has been open for this to happen for the responsible Eritrean officials. So I repeat that the Afar persuaded the United Nations that the Afar are persecuted inside of Eritrea. The Afar persuaded the United Nations that this is a crime against humanity and that member states must act to protect the Afar. There is a duty to protect and to punish the criminals. This is your achievement. This was done through your effort. This was done through your brave witnesses. This was done through your brave activists who organized all of this. In other words, be aware of your situation now. You have a voice. You have power. You have rights as members of a persecuted class, as well as national minorities and indigenous peoples. Use this voice, use this power, use these rights wisely in the service of all Afar and all other persecuted people inside of Eritrea. Now, this matter is before the Security Council of the United Nations. And beginning in October, the government of Ethiopia has a non-permanent seat on the Security Council. So I recommend that you consider working with the government of Ethiopia as well as with the government of Djibouti to make representations to the Security Council about action on the duty to protect. The abuses that we are talking about, the dispossession by violence, by murders and other atrocities, this is taking place as we're speaking. And the refugees also, this is ongoing violence against them. They want to go home, many of them. There is a duty to protect these people on behalf of all member states of the United Nations. So I recommend that you consider making representations through these governments about the duty to protect, and that ways be found to take action to protect the persecuted Afar and to assist the refugees. Now, as I mentioned, the Samara Declaration claims rights for the Afar as indigenous peoples. Is it true that, that the Afar are indigenous peoples? Well, the characteristics of indigenous peoples are set out in several places. The first would be the International Labor Convention number 169, which is an international human rights treaty that was renovated in 1989, and the characteristics of indigenous peoples were set out there. The characteristics of indigenous peoples are also set out in the work of the Working Group of the United Nations on Indigenous Peoples. There are various papers suggesting what groups are entitled to be considered as indigenous and to accede to indigenous rights. And the characteristics of indigenous peoples are also set out in the various writings of law professors, jurists, and such. So I asked my respected colleague, Sébastien Gramont, the Dean of Law at the University of Ottawa Law School, to answer this question for us. Are the Afar indigenous? And he produced a very thoughtful, detailed, 7-page legal opinion reviewing the characteristics at international law as to who is indigenous and the specific situation of the Afar in the Afar Triangle to answer that question. And his answer to that, thoughtful, detailed, was yes. The Afar are indigenous. And so I filed Dean Gramont's opinion with the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Indigenous Peoples, and that is now a matter of United Nations record. What are the consequences of this? Convention 169 and other international legal instruments recognize indigenous peoples' right to self-determination within a nation state and the right to a land base. It recognizes their aspirations to control their own institutions of self-government, to control their ways of life, their identity, their language, their lands, and resources. All of these things are under pressure in Eritrea, certainly, but also to a certain extent in the other countries of the Horn. And so the recognition of the indigenous claims of the Afar as indigenous peoples has a legal foundation in an evolving wave of claims, rights, understandings that the community of nations recognize. And this is something that may advance the discussion that the Afar have, I'm good, thank you, with others in the evolving debates. So, just let me sum all of this up for you. The Afar have the right model for development in the Horn. Multinational federalism, minority rights, and indigenous rights. It's the right model because experience shows that it's the only thing that works in diverse, plural states to produce peace, rule of law, development. And we see, among the countries of the world, Belgium, Canada, Switzerland, that where this model is applied, we have the richest, the freest, the most stable countries that world history has produced. This idea has unanimous support among the Afar, and the Afar have managed to persuade many within other nationalities in the Horn of the correctness of this vision. This is why I say the Afar have the right model. The Afar have made incredible progress. If you had asked me in 2010, was it possible for a small group of Afar activists to get the equivalent of arrest warrants against the civil and military infrastructure of a sovereign nation, I would have said, you know, this is not possible. But it has happened, and it is your reality, and you have made it happen. The result is that the government of Eritrea is increasingly isolated, increasingly illegitimate. Its leaders are becoming imprisoned inside of Eritrea, increasingly face the threat of arrest and prosecution for crimes. The situation there is unstable, it will change, and you need to be ready, alert to the opportunities, so that you can participate strongly in the change when it happens. And the model that you have, and the support that you have attracted to it, should also suggest changes to the constitutions of other countries in the Horn. And I recommend that you consider seriously the extent to which this works for you. The Afar also have the momentum. They share a vision as to how they want to be governed. Build on that unity. You have a political base to establish a power-sharing constitution. When the Eritrean dictatorship either implodes, collapses, dies from natural causes, or otherwise crumbles. Use that political base to broaden. Make alliances throughout the Horn. People want to hear your successes. Share them. Persuade others of the correctness of your view. Be fair among yourselves. Build your internal governance. Make sure that you are always a model that others want to follow. That you are always acting in the service of your people. That your leaders are accountable. That you're accountable. This is your time. Seize the moment. Build your movement. Your progress is durable because your cause is just. Your constitutional model is correct. Your momentum is gathering strength. Your spirit together is strong. Do not stop.
Inspire us, and we appreciate your commitment to our people and to be a voice for those who are voiceless. Thank you very much.